Hi, this is Carl Rust, and I've worked in schools for over 30 years. I've learned a lot about how people learn, and I wrote a book called Get Out of the Way and Let Kids Learn: How We Can Transform Schools and Reintroduce Natural Learning. Hello, everybody. This is Carl Rust, Get Out of the Way and Let Kids Learn podcast. Number 9. This is episode 9. And the news that I have to talk about is that I'm back to school. I've had 2 days back at school with the 3rd and 4th grade high ability class of 15 kids. And it's been wonderful. It's been a great beginning. I'm just so impressed with these kids. They're such a nice group. They're very creative. They're very thoughtful. And day one, well, first of all, we had back to school night, so I got to meet some of the kids, some of the parents, and I talked a little bit about some of my philosophy that learning occurs everywhere all the time, that learning should be directed by the learner, and that authentic learning, real learning, comes when someone has a question or a problem and they figure it out. So that's hard to measure with grades and tests, but being in a conventional school, as part of a conventional school, there's going to have to be some compromises. But what I realized when I was working in my program that I ran for several years, which was part of conventional school, that when those conflicts and those problems arise and somebody's telling us that we can't do something or that we have to do something, then I found that the best thing to do is just bring it to our learning community and say, hey, everybody, this is what we are required to do. How are we going to handle this? What do you want to do? So I did look at the curriculum ahead of time a little bit, and the State Department of Education has literature curriculum for high ability. And I looked at it, and at first I'm like, oh man, there was a pre-assessment. And I thought, I don't want to give this pre-assessment to these kids. Reading it over, it just seemed horrible, and it was like, who wants to do this, and why is it important? But the more I thought about it, the more I thought, why not just throw it out there and let them take a crack at it and see how they do? And so the first day, they got a bank of words that seemed fairly random to me. And what they were asked to do was, how many sentences can you make out of these words? And when I looked at the words, I was thinking, oh, this is interesting. And it wasn't clear to me whether you were supposed to only use those words or you could add in other words. So when somebody asked me that, I said, just add in words if you want to. So I was watching to see what they would do, and a lot of them didn't seem terribly interested in it. I didn't bother them or nag them about that. Some of them were kind of giggling and laughing, talking to each other. A young person asked me if they could work together, and at first I said no, and then I thought about that later. I thought, I wonder why I said no. But anyway, they were still kind of doing it. And so here's where teachers can make themselves miserable, because kids were giggling and they were having funny sentences and they were telling each other. And if you are so uptight and worried about this, like, oh my gosh, this is a test, you can't talk to each other, then you make yourself miserable, you make the kids miserable. And I just kind of said something like, I hope you're writing some of these down instead of just saying them. But the whole point of the thing is, let's just throw it out there and let people do it. And looking at the papers later, I haven't really examined them real closely. They didn't write a lot of sentences. There was one kid that wrote quite a few funny sentences. He was a pretty creative writer. But now, what am I going to do with these papers? That's a good question. So what am I going to do with this information? I think what I'm going to do, instead of sitting down and analyzing them and grading them and saying, look, this kid had one sentence, so he's a failure. This kid had 5 sentences, so they're successful. instead of doing that, I think I'm just going to save that paper. And then in a few weeks down the road, we'll do something similar. We'll do some practicing in between and see if they do any better the second time around. Personally, I don't care whether they do better or they don't do better, but I guess it is information. The other things we did, we talked about some rules or expectations. We talked about indoor recess because it was very likely going to rain that day and we were going to have indoor recess. So we talked about what kind of things can you do at indoor recess. We had what they called location training, which means we went to various places in the building and either one of the teachers or administrator would explain to everybody, we're kind of grouped with fourth grade, everybody in fourth grade, how do you do dismissal? How do you come into the cafeteria? How do you handle recess? 3 blows of the whistle means it's time to go in. 1 tweet of the whistle means he's trying to get somebody's attention. 6 tweets on the whistle means that it's emergency, go to the wall. So it's like probably necessary stuff to know. So that took a big chunk of our morning. We had specials, and these kids at this school, starting in 3rd grade, which is all of ours, everyone plays an instrument. And see, again, this is something that I just think is so kind of crazy. It's like, I think it's great that kids play instruments. I have nothing against that at all. I think it's wonderful. But why do they have to play an instrument? What if they don't want to play an instrument? I mean, it's like, it's just typical conventional school. If playing an instrument is good for people, then let's have everybody do it. And it's like, some people don't want to play an instrument and they're not interested. So, but anyway, so we divided kids up into 4 groups. 3 of our groups went to orchestra. 1 group went to phys ed. And then every day it's a little different. So that was part of our morning. Then we had, we talked about what projects they could do, which a project time started after we did some language arts. And then they were kind of free. So it was really interesting the first day because we did end up having indoor recess. It was raining like cats and dogs outside. So some of the kids were working on collages in the morning and they kept working on collages. Some kids were playing games. So for indoor recess, they started to play a game. Some people were playing chess. Some people were playing headbands, which is a game where you put a card on your head and you try to ask questions to find out what the card is. So they're having fun, enjoying themselves. And then at 12:35, recess is supposed to be over, right? And I just kind of softly said, hey, guys, it's time to get back to projects. And I kind of watched to see what they would do. The kids that were working on collages were kind of already doing projects, so they kept working on collages. The kids who were playing the games kept playing the games. And I didn't say anything. And some time went by, and one of the kids came up and he said, is it still recess? I said, well, it's really supposed to be project time, but what would you be doing if you were doing project time? So they just played, So a good chunk of their first day, they played. And I'm going to talk about day number 2, or maybe a different day if something really startling happens next week. One interesting thing that happened on day 1, one kid kind of had some trouble at his old school because he really doesn't like to sit still. He doesn't really like to listen. He doesn't like to do whatever it is people are doing. So the first day we were talking about things and he was making paper airplanes. And he was also flying the paper airplanes right in the middle of everything. So, and then I have these big pieces of poster board at their tables because I had thought that maybe we would make some collages at some point. So, of course, this kid takes his big poster board, makes this giant paper airplane out of it, and then he's flying it around. We did have to discuss a little bit about timing and also direction of this jumbo jet flying across the classroom and knocking into people. But we talked about that, and then he came up with the ingenious idea of poking a bunch of holes in it. And we had this little game called Barrel of Monkeys, where the monkeys have little arms that are hooked, and you can hook them together. See how many monkeys can you make in a string? And he was putting them into his holes in his paper airplane and flying them across the room. So it was really kind of interesting and unique and fun. So that was day one. So next, we're going to talk about Chapter 9 of my book, Do We Need to Supervise Children to Keep Them Safe? Okay, I had to move a little bit because my phone was getting ready to die. So, Chapter 9 in the book, Get Out of the Way and Let Kids Learn, How We Can Transform Schools and Reintroduce Natural Learning, has this question. Do we need to supervise children to keep them safe? So they start out every chapter with a little story, and here's the Chapter 9 story. Bernice loves to flip on the playground, but it just about gives her kindergarten teacher a heart attack every time she does it. Bernice, stop that! That is not safe! Mr. Carroll yells, running over to the slide. Bernice is puzzled. Why is it not safe? She does it all the time at home. When she asks Mr. Kelly why it's not safe, he says that others might try it and they would know how to do it. Bernice answers, but I would help them learn. So in schools, conventional schools, and it has some partly to do with liability, but we're afraid to leave kids alone. So if kids are working on, say, a collage, or they're working on some artwork or writing a story, and they're sitting on the floor and everybody's quiet, we worry about leaving the room, even for a few seconds, because they're not being supervised. In his book, Weapons of Mass Instruction, John Taylor Gatto relates story after story about people, some famous and some not, who did not finish school but became successful. One remarkable story is about Sir Richard Branson, who started multiple businesses, including Virgin Records, Virgin Air, and Virgin Galactic. He was a dropout and started his first business at age 16. When he was 4 years old, his mother drove him to an unfamiliar part of London and asked him if he knew how to get home. And when he said yes, she said, okay, get out and do it. And he did at 4. At age 12, he was making 100-mile bike trips. He says on the Virgin website, you don't learn to walk by following rules. You learn by doing and by falling over. Summerhill in England, Sudbury Valley School in Massachusetts, and many others, students are unsupervised by adults a large part of the time. Part of learning to be an adult in the culture you live in is to take risks and find out the limits of your ability and strength. We all must conquer fear in order to be effective in our modern world. I know when I was growing up, and I know this has been eons and eons ago, I did a lot of things on my own. There were summers my parents both worked, and I was home alone, and I played in the neighborhood. We did things, and I know there was another time that I lived in a house that was on the edge of a subdivision and undeveloped land all behind it, and me and my friends from down the street used to go and play way back in those woods, and there was a creek back there, and I rode my bike all over town. When I was probably 10 or 11 years old, I would ride my bike up to the office building where my parents worked to have lunch with them. And I survived. And I know we want to keep kids safe, but sometimes we go a little bit overboard. So Peter Gray points out in Free to Learn that we learn to become effective adults by playing with the tools of our culture. So in a hunter-gatherer culture, those would be knives and bows and arrows and fire-making tools and those kind of things. In our culture, it's computers and books and, but it's also just testing our physical selves. So they let their son take a trip to England when he was in his teens. He earned the money himself, arranged to stay at various locations, managed his own special medical condition at when he was a teenager. I think he was 14 or 15. Louis L'Amour, famous Western author, talks about how he left school at age 15 to travel the United States and the world. He worked in a variety of jobs, went to sea, and had many astonishing experiences. One time he was working as a mine attendant in Death Valley, California. When the owner of the mine failed to come pick him up, he set out in a Model T Ford. When the car broke down, he was forced to walk out with almost no supplies and a very sketchy knowledge of where water was. Sometimes we treat the children as if they're made of glass. And if we don't watch them, they're going to break. But it was always interesting to me. I worked with kids that would physically be aggressive to each other. But I noticed they tended to do it when there were adults standing around who would immediately intervene if things got out of control. And it made me wonder, why don't they come in after a weekend with broken arms and black eyes? They must know how to keep themselves safe. They must know how to navigate their home waters. And I don't know how much adult supervision they had. Maybe they had some, maybe they didn't. But we found out after a while that it was best to leave them alone to figure out their differences unless it went a little too far. If we always prevent them from experiencing danger and engaging in risky business, how will they find out their abilities, their limits, and their inner strength? So when I was assistant principal at elementary school, I talked the principal and letting me have a bigger office, and I had study carrels. I had like 3 study carrels and a big table in the middle. And if a kid was having a hard time in class and he was mad and upset, I would let him sit in my room, and I would go walk around the building, and I would just come back and check on him, see how he was doing. Never lost one. Never had them hurt themselves or anybody else. I'll never forget one little boy I don't remember why I brought him in, but I had brought in a bag of river pebbles. And they were kind of leaning against the wall, and he was mad about something. He was kicking this bag, and I was watching him, and I thought, that's probably going to hurt your feet. I might have even said that to him. But he was kicking it. Eventually, he managed to kick a little hole in the plastic, and some of the river pebbles came out. And I said, have you ever seen these before? Look at these, because they are so dirty looking and dull. But look what happens when you wash them. I happen to have a sink in there. And so we wash one off, and they get kind of sparkly and have colors, and they're pretty. And he got really interested in that. But I would leave kids alone, and I would let kids work in the hall, and sometimes teachers do that too. When I was doing my long-term 6th grade sub position, there was a little workroom next door that had a copy machine in it, and it had a table and chair, some other stuff. And kids would ask me if they could go in there and work, and I would let them. And then eventually a sign appeared on the door, no one allowed in here without teacher's supervision. And I thought, okay. But really, there's no reason that you can't have kids do things on their own. It's how they can figure out, what can I do? What are my limits? And we don't want to leave them totally alone. We have to keep them safe. We want to try to intervene if they're making a bad decision. That doesn't mean we have to supervise them all the time. Sudbury Valley has a school in Massachusetts, has a certification system. So if you want to use power tools, you've got to prove that you are capable. If you want to be able to walk into town and go to the store, you have to be certified. You have to show that you understand safety rules, that you understand how to walk on the sidewalk or what side of the road to walk on. You have to demonstrate that you understand what to do if a stranger approaches you. But you can be certified to do different things that maybe are considered dangerous. How much supervision a child needs varies from child to child. There are some children that you have to watch. There are others that are probably would be perfectly fine all day long with no adult supervision. But everyone should have some time to themselves. So here's my suggestions. If you work at a school or you know someone that works at a school, maybe try these out. Talk to parents and kids to see if there are any activities that they feel comfortable with children being unsupervised. Number 2, leave groups unsupervised for short periods of time and gradually lengthen them. It also reminds me of another incident that happened when I was teaching. I was interviewing for a director of technology position, and I thought I had talked to the assistant principal or somebody to have coverage, what they call coverage. So some other adult, paraprofessional, or somebody else would be in my room just kind of supervising until I got back. Because my interview was like at 8 o'clock and school started around then. So at 9 o'clock, I walk into the building and I come to my classroom, and all the kids are in their seat working, doing their thing. And I'm looking around, there's no adult. And I was kind of asking, who's the adult that's in here? Nobody. And maybe sometime I'll talk about that group, because that had been a group that I had looped with for 3 years. And they kind of knew the system. So they were just doing the thing that we do. And I found out later that one of my kids might have stood up because there was some chaos going on and said, "Hey, everybody, shut up and go and sit down and do your work." But I don't know if that's true or not. Number 3, set ground rules and expectations for activities and have groups self-evaluate on how well they did. So, supervision is a two-edged sword. I mean, you want to be present for your kids, but you don't want to stifle them. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe so you can be notified each time a new episode comes out. Check out my book, Get Out of the Way and Let Kids Learn, How It Can Transform Schools and Reintroduce Natural Learning. There's a couple of podcasts I recommend. The Liberated podcast with Carrie McDonald and Fair the Free Child with Akilah Richards. And there's going to be some others I'll be mentioning. I'm going to add to my list. Check out my band, The Rest Show, at therestshow.com and on all streaming platforms. Thanks for listening. And remember, get out of the way and let kids learn. This has been Get Out of the Way and Let Kids Learn podcast. If you liked it, please subscribe, follow, share, and leave a comment.